Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down one of the most powerful and maybe one of the most misunderstood belief systems shaping America. This fascination we have with the end of the world. And you might think it's all about fear, but what's really surprising is that it's also a story about hope. You know, this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of a fundamental human need. We're storytelling creatures, right? We need things to make sense. So when we're faced with tragedies that just seem to defy any explanation, we instinctively look for a story, some kind of narrative that can anchor us and give our lives a sense of meaning. So why are we so fascinated with the end of the world? I mean, this question really digs into something deep in our psychology. Think about it. We crave justice in a world that feels corrupt. We want something permanent when it feels like everything is just slipping away. And that's what apocalyptic thinking offers. It's a framework that says, yeah, the world is broken, but just for now. And here's the paradox, which is kind of wild when you think about it. Imagining the world's destruction is, in a way, also imagining its rebirth. These stories are actually a source of comfort. They promise that all the chaos has an order, that what's broken will be fixed, and that, in the end, injustice won't get the last word. Even the word apocalypse tells us so much. It comes from the Greek apocalypsis, which means an unveiling or a revelation. So it's actually less about pure destruction and way more about the promise of ultimate clarity. We're drawn to these stories not just for the catastrophe, but because they promise that finally everything will make sense. And in a world that's so ambiguous, that idea of absolute certainty, well, that's pretty irresistible. Okay, so this universal feeling, this human urge, it took on a very specific and really fervent life of its own here in America. This idea that the nation was somehow chosen to play a key role in history, that created the perfect soil for this feeling to grow into a super detailed, step-by-step timeline for how it all ends. All right, there's a technical term for this whole thing. It's called eschatology. It's basically the study of last things. It's the part of theology that's all about the final events of history. It's how different belief systems answer that huge question, how does the story end? For Christians, it all centers on the return of Christ. But how and when that happens, well, that is a hot debate. Right at the center of that debate is this idea of the millennium, a 1,000-year reign mentioned in the book of Revelation. And there are basically three main views. You've got premillennialism, which is pretty pessimistic. It says the world gets worse and we need a rescue. Then there's postmillennialism, which is more optimistic. It says humanity helps build a golden age before Christ returns. And finally, amillennialism, which says the whole 1,000 years thing is symbolic for the age we're in right now. Okay, so out of those three, one of them, a really specific type of premillennialism called dispensationalism, just exploded and became this huge dominant force, especially in American evangelicalism. And it wasn't just a general idea, oh no, it offered a detailed, almost chart-like timeline for the end of history. And this system wasn't built overnight. It developed over like 150 years, thanks to a few really key people. It started in the 1830s with John Nelson Darby, who kind of created the whole framework. Then, in 1909, the Scofield Reference Bible put his ideas right into the margins of the Bible itself, making it super accessible. And then, much later, guys like Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye turned it all into blockbuster bestsellers and thrilling novels. The key thing to get here is its clarity. That's the appeal. In a really chaotic world, this system offers a precise, step-by-step script for how everything is going to go down. Suddenly, confusing news headlines aren't so confusing anymore. They're just predictable plot points in this grand divine drama. Everything from the rapture, where believers are secretly taken away, all the way to the final judgment. All right, let's move on, because this isn't just about theology. This blueprint doesn't stay inside the walls of a church. It breaks out into the real world, and it has these huge, profound consequences for politics, for foreign policy, even for how we think about the planet itself. So for a lot of believers in this system, the modern state of Israel is absolutely central. It's seen as the prophetic clock. Its creation back in 1948 was considered by many to be undeniable proof that the end times were officially kicking off. Every event there is read like a tick-tock on a divine clock, counting down to the final act. And this is where you can really see how this belief system shapes actual policy. We're talking about things like strong support for Israel, lobbying for Jerusalem to be its capital. It's all tied to fulfilling prophecy. This can lead to theological opposition to things like a two-state solution, because conflict in the Middle East is often seen as a necessary precursor to the Second Coming. Now, think about this quote: "You don't polish the brass of a sinking ship." That was from a 19th century evangelist named Dwight Moody, and it perfectly captures how this same exact framework can influence another huge issue: the environment. I mean, if you believe the world is a sinking ship that's destined for destruction anyway, why bother trying to save it? And that thinking leads to two really different views. On one hand, you have the disposable scenery idea. The Earth is temporary, it's destined for destruction, so conservation efforts are kind of futile. But on the other hand, you have a growing movement called creation care, which argues that no, humanity has a divine mandate from Genesis to tend and keep the Earth, that protecting creation is actually an act of faithfulness. And if you're wondering just how mainstream this all became, look at this. In the 1970s, Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, sold 18 million copies. What he did was take all the anxieties of the time, the Cold War, nuclear threats, everything happening in the Middle East, and he mapped them directly onto biblical prophecy. It was the best-selling nonfiction book of the decade. Incredible!
And then, a generation later, it happened all over again with the Left Behind book series, this time as fiction. And these weren't just novels, they were an experience. They dropped you right into the middle of the chaos of the rapture and the tribulation. They sold over 60 million copies. It made this theology feel less like some abstract chart and more like a thriller that could be happening right now.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. The point of this whole explainer isn't to argue about whether this timeline is right or wrong. The real takeaway is to step back and just understand the sheer power of it as a story. Really, the best way to think about it is as a powerful lens. It's a lens that provides meaning and order to current events for millions of people. One scholar even called it a divine novel. And that's perfect, because it transforms the chaos of the 24-hour news cycle into a coherent, thrilling story. One that gives believers a sense of purpose, a sense that they know what's really going on. So, you see, in the end, studying last things isn't really about predicting the future. It's not about charts and timelines. It's about how our beliefs about how the story ends shape the kind of story we want to tell with our own lives, right here, right now. And that leaves us with this final question to chew on. How does the story we believe about the end shape the world we're creating today? Because whether you expect catastrophe or renewal, whether you're looking for an escape or a reason to engage, that belief profoundly shapes our politics, our world, and our actions right now.